Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Transformational Astrology. We're going to be talking about the new moon coming up this weekend on Saturday, and it is a pretty lively new moon, as most of these new moon configurations have been lately. We keep having them happen at 23 degrees or something like that. It'll be drifting back toward 22, 21, but coming months. But this new moon is right at 23 degrees of Pisces, and Uranus remains at 23 degrees of Aries. So it's only one sign over, but there's still a connection. There's a chime, same degree. It's going to be strong. So what we want to talk about in this new moon configuration is the way all these outer planet combinations that are present are affecting us in different ways. There's different ways that we're responding. There's different ways that we're being stimulated, and really it's quite a variety. The basic underlying theme is our own personal transformation. We are really all about becoming. And what are we becoming but more authentic versions of ourselves? And I go back to Bob Dylan, everybody not busy being born is busy dying. You got to be moving one direction or another. There's no such thing as stasis in nature, and we are a part of nature. So let's take a look at the chart. Without further ado, let me see. I just have to go and do a share screen here. And you should be able to have a pretty good look at this new moon chart coming up very early in the morning on the West Coast on Saturday. And here's the 23 degree mark of the sun and moon as I was talking, and here's the 23 degree mark of Uranus. And I do associate this still with a square, although Pluto has moved beyond. It used to be that the Pluto-Saturn midpoint was around that same degree. Now Saturn, of course, has moved beyond. Pluto has moved further into Capricorn, but this is as far as it will get. Next month, it will station at this degree and start to move backwards. So, we're sitting here for a while. It is very close to the 27 degree mark of Capricorn, which is the United States Pluto. And we've been saying all along that this is really about the ultimate, the Pluto return of the United States, similarly to the Saturn return of an individual, is a time of change. It's a time of maturation. It's a time of transformation. And we are seeing, I believe, big changes in the United States. We have seen the last 4 years, which brought a certain factor to the fore and made it an example of the extremity of going to the right and what that might mean. And the reaction to that, as the pendulum always swings, is a little bit more pulling back towards the progressive side, which we're seeing with this new Biden administration. And, it is time to take action. It is time to address some of the problems that came about with COVID, including not just the disease, but of course the economic consequences. And of course, as well, this new bill that they just signed in Washington lifts half the children that were in poverty, officially at that level of poverty, out of poverty, half of them. So that's worth doing. That's what Ram Dass always says. I just been reading his autobiography, very fascinating. That you relieve suffering. You just try your best to relieve suffering, and he did that all his life, especially after he was confirmed in his understanding of the spiritual nature of his mission, of all of our mission, each one of us here on Earth, to do the best we can, to be the most authentic version of ourselves that we can. And these planet, mostly outer planet connections that we can discern in the current astrology, not just this new moon, but highlighted in this new moon, are about just that. It's about the personal transformation that we're all in the midst of. And as well, you can read it also very clearly as a societal transformation that we're all in the midst of as a society. So let me point out some of these things. Maybe one of the most fascinating to me is the way Pluto is still a factor. I see this not so much with I think it's about a 3 degree orb between Uranus and Pluto and square. So that's still a pretty strong square. But we also have this opposition between new planets, new planets Eris at 23 degrees of Aries and Haumea at 28 degrees of Libra. Now that's not such a strong opposition, it's 5 degrees off. But on the other hand, if you look at the midpoint, it turns out to be 26. I can show you that in the TimePassages software. You just go to reports, you can say display reports, you can say midpoints, and then we would want to look at the midpoint between Eris, which is down here a ways. So there's Eris, there's Haumea. So Eris to Haumea, we can see, is 26 degrees. And that is interesting because that is very close to the same minutes. It's about 10 minutes off from where the Pluto is. So this brings Pluto into greater prominence. When we say Pluto is in greater prominence, we mean transformation. We mean also to some extent the compulsion towards power and, perhaps not always the right use of the Pluto energy, but the best use of the death and rebirth represented by Pluto is personal transformation, seeing where something's come about that is not the intended result after our maturation, after the point we reached in our personal evolution, and where we can move beyond it, where we can let go of things, certain usually behaviors, certain things that we are ready to move beyond. It could be a house or it could be even a relationship, but there's something we're leaving behind with this strong Pluto. And it's up to us to use discernment to figure out what that is and where we're exercising, where our actions are in alignment with our highest intention for ourselves, what we really want for ourselves, what we conceive our mission to be in this lifetime. And that's where we're all headed and what we're all about. And that brings up the Eris, because Eris, feminine warrior for soul intention, how to act on what is your deepest, most profound values. And what are your deepest, most profound values? And to operate on those principles and to ignore consensus thought in the situation. And oftentimes, these people that have strong Eris run against the grain of society to bring about what they believe, what they can see, what they can feel deep within themselves to be their own unique contribution. So that's how that works. If you can tune in to what you most deeply, most profoundly believe, what your higher self is indicating, you can't really be out of sync with what is best for you and what is best for the society as you bring it to society, as you return it to the collective. So that's the basis of the Eris fundamental importance this whole past year of Eris in this configuration of first Saturn and Pluto, structural change, structural deep transformation. And now it's just Pluto and Capricorn, but that's a similar message because of Capricorn being identified with Saturn. It is about the society, it is about how things can be evolving in a way that makes sense going forward. What is the right way to go? And actually, the right way to go, that brings in Haumea, because Haumea is a profound connection to nature, which I have come to realize is really speaking to a deep part of ourselves, a profound connection to the deepest part of ourselves, which is aligned with nature, with what we might call natural law, with what we might call right action, right relationship. So as we discover what we have inside, and as we come into a better understanding of what Haumea can bring to the party, and remember that Haumea is also closely square to Pluto from the other side, a couple of degrees further. So we do have this really strong configuration that involves Pluto, Eris, and Haumea. And it is powerful, and it is really what we're all about, as I say, what we're up to. Now, the other thing, though, that we want to make sure not to neglect to bring into this discussion is we do have a very strong position of Saturn with Uranus. It's only about 1.5 degrees off here. And I can right-click on the Saturn in the TimePassages software. It brings up the next station, which is in mid-May, and it is 13 degrees. So it will stop at that point when it'll get beyond Uranus, because Saturn does move faster than Uranus. It'll get beyond Uranus, but then at 13 degrees, it stations earlier. You see, Uranus does not station until August. So then, and it will be at 14. So then at that point, Uranus begins to catch up because Saturn is actually moving back toward the 12-degree mark and Uranus is moving toward it. and then they will be all involved with each other most of the year, off and on. So what do we get out of Saturn and Uranus? It's very clear that there's this huge dichotomy taking place in the society with conservative versus progressive voices, very strong right now, very strong division in our society, especially in the United States. And the other thing is we must recognize it's in all of us. So all of us have this impulse to jump the tracks, to move ahead, that's Uranus, to completely abandon whatever came before because we're just ready for a new deal. And of course, when we say build back better from the COVID reset, the COVID shutdown, we're saying that, and it's a societal goal and it's also an individual goal, that maybe we can make something out of this from the consciousness that we've gained. And for one thing, very interestingly, astrology is much more widely accepted now than it ever was. I think it's becoming more clear that it has something to contribute to our understanding, and that it brings a spiritual dimension in, which we didn't really fully understand as a society, as a culture. All the old institutions of religious connection are kind of fading, not really appropriate to this 21st humanistic century. It's really all about the humanism at this point, but there is a spiritual component to that, which is very important that we all tune into. And I think astrology helps in understanding what that is. So within each of us, we have Saturn and Uranus battling. Do we go or do we stay? Do we jump the tracks or do we stay safe? Do we abandon previous ideas and conceptions, quit that job, jump in a van and travel across the country and go to a different place, try living in the woods, try living in nature, all the things that the 60s brought forward, which was Uranus with Pluto after all. And then, the other competing idea that, you have to go slow, you can't go too fast, or you're going to kind of maybe wipe away too much of what is keeping everything together. You have to keep everything together. So it is the concretization of those kind of progressive impulses, to make it concrete, to make it real, to make it practical. Revolutionaries acting as though they're in charge, as indeed some of them now are. And the conservative forces acting a little bit like they're in a rebellious place because they don't have the mandate that they used to have. So they're acting a little bit like rebels, like storming the Capitol. So anyway, that's very interesting to think about in the society, and remembering that it's also an individual mandate of each of one of us. Now, maybe the most obvious thing about this new moon, which we don't want to miss talking about, is the proximity of Neptune. So here we have the new moon at 23 degrees and just a little bit of Pisces, and here's almost 21 degrees. So it's very close, 2.5 degrees. And then Venus being right there too. So Venus at 19 degrees, almost 20, within a degree of Neptune, with Neptune bolstered and amplified by that new moon being right there with Neptune. And Neptune, I have come to realize, is another transformational force. We think of Neptune as being very woo-woo, very kind of beyond the ethereal planes, the astral planes, having also an element of imagination, an element of idealism, an element of potentially deception, because what's real and what's not real becomes fuzzy in Neptune's world, where it's all kind of in the imagination and in the astral planes beyond. So there's all those things are a factor now. And we would have to say also that with Venus involved, that our relationship energy can partake of this kind of idealism. Could be wonderful, could be very spiritual, could be also over-idealism, could be self-deception to some extent. So we have to be careful, and we have to bring Saturn back in with the concept of what is it that we are up to, and how do we see our relationship evolving and changing, and yet not to over-idealize it, but to just be real and just be, here we are, whatever is. So those are the warnings with Neptune. There is a sense of you can get a little bit carried away with your imagination, but it's also a very beautiful time, very spiritual time. The transformation of Neptune really has to do with, they're both powerful, Pluto and Neptune, both very powerful energies that have to do with change, that have to do with seeing new ways of being. Neptune with Uranus oftentimes is bringing new spiritual realities into existence, having that brilliant idea. And that's been in the air also, not currently, but it was a lot of Neptune and Uranus in the past decades, which, the younger generations coming along, whatever generation you call them, do have a lot of spiritual connection, natural spiritual connection, which I think is going to become very important as we go further into the 21st century. So there is a transformational element associated with Neptune as well. And we are moving toward maybe our better version of ourselves, maybe our more authentic person that we can be. What is our real life mission? What is our purpose? How does it connect spiritually? Because there is a spiritual component to all that we do. The universe holds us up, however you want to speak of it. You want to call it God, or you want to call it Christ, or you want to call it Buddha. You can, all those things. And it does involve kind of a recognition that there's more to life than the simple getting and spending, as Wordsworth has it, In getting and spending, we lay waste our powers, he says. And so, yes, we have to recognize that there are these other more spiritual components, which is what the message of all these outer planet connections really is. But finally, and this is really interesting, I think, in the previous full moon before this new moon, Uranus was at 7 degrees, along with Chiron, along with Maki-Maki. So we still have this opposition of Maki-Maki, partile opposition, 7 degrees of Maki-Maki versus 7 in Libra versus 7 degrees of Chiron in Aries. And since Maki-Maki does refer to also connection to nature, but in an activist sense, and let's do something about it. That must be something we can do to protect nature. There must be something so that all the climate change activists have pretty strong Maki-Maki, I've found. But it's also just a practical, spiritual, really, it goes to depth, understanding that there is something that we need to do to take action. And I've seen all kinds of different activists, not just climate activists, associated with Maki-Maki. And with Chiron, of course, it brings up the issue of, it could be the climate change issue, the terrible pollution of our Earth, which is something we have to just start dealing with. And it is very interesting that we're seeing with this new Biden administration and with this combination of planets that's been around for a couple of months now, we're seeing all these executive actions, and the new head of the EPA is very progressive oriented, so which is environmental protection. So, we are seeing some action being taken at the societal level, and probably in each one of us, we're feeling the pull of this. And I can actually share something that I think is very interesting. This is a bit of a sidetrack, but I will say it because I think it's so interesting that when I saw this combination with Maki-Maki and Uranus, I'm sorry, not Uranus, but Chiron, and Uranus as being part of it too, being so tuned in at this moment at the same time as this movie came out. And it was a movie about getting back to the land, but it was not a movie. The story was not about getting back to the land in a very peaceful way, the way it was the difficulty, the rigors, and also the kind of anti-social aspect of getting back to the land. This woman that was in a desperate, difficult place, a depressed place, and wanted to just get away from everything and learning. She had to learn how to live on her own in the woods and take care of herself and be able to be in a survival situation. So it really did speak to these nature issues, So I started thinking about, and this was Robin Wright. She was married to Sean Penn. She's been an actress for many, very fine actress, but then also just recently, this is her first directorial debut. So I actually thought to myself, I wonder what she's got at 7 degrees. See, because this is the way I think when I do the research, and I'm just aware that this is a 7-degree time of this kind of environmental activism of practicality, and what can you do about it? How can you actually survive in nature? How can you heal yourself through nature? How can you perhaps heal nature through your own activity? And so I was looking for 7 degrees, and let me see if I can bring up the chart. I think I can. If I just, let's see, open this chart. So just bear with me, I'm going to have to find her chart. I wasn't planning on doing this, but I think it's worth doing. So many charts. Well, you know what? I'm not going to get her chart up, as it turns out. It's on my other computer, and I just realized that. So I'll just tell you and relate to you that if you look at the birth data for Robin Wright, and you look at her Maki is at 7 degrees of Leo. So the interesting thing there, and I say this as a little side note, is that I went looking for 7 degrees, and there's her Maki, 7 degrees of Leo, and she's the one that just came out with this brand new effort. It went in theatrical release on February 12th and into streaming on March 5th. So it's very current, very topical to this timing. And I just thought how fascinating that the 7 degree mark, it occupies a trine position, 7 degrees Leo, to the Chiron partile trine, to the Chiron partile sextile, to the Maki position. And here she is releasing her work. I find oftentimes, by the way, that it is the moment of publication. You might think it was more the beginning of a project, and maybe it is in some other charts you could look at, but the actual, of course, the publication of the effort is oftentimes the easy chart to find. And by George, you really do find that in those moments of the work becoming more widely known to the public, it's kind of like the culmination in some sense of what you've been trying to accomplish. You can see the energy of these whatever planetary alignments that do show up in that at that timing. So I just think all this research is very interesting that just continues to show that these new planets beyond Pluto, the three of them, Eris, Maki, and Haumea, this is Haumea, Maki, do really contribute to our understanding. They are active. They are definitely factors in charts, significant in charts, and they do contribute to our understanding of what we have at depth, because like Pluto, these new planets way out there, they do go to depth within the psyche. So it's a really fascinating study. And we're going to be having interpretations for Maki and Haumea in the TimePassages software rather soon now. We're working on that at the moment. So let's see. I think that was pretty much all I wanted to say about this new moon. Yeah, I think we covered pretty well the various factors there. That Pluto is strong in this configuration. Neptune also. The Saturn-Uranus is still active. It's kind of fading. It'll come back in mid-May. And we do have finally, with this new moon, Mercury getting to the point where it's leaving. This is where it started. It was at 26 degrees of Aquarius when it began its retrograde in February. And so now we're finally getting to the point where it's beyond where it started, which we say that's the retrograde shadow. It's beyond its retrograde shadow. And therefore, things are a little more stabilized. Certainly, there's a feeling of optimism in the air, and we do have this strong position also of Jupiter, which is just exactly 30 degrees away from the position of Venus in this chart, and close to the all the other Pisces energy is being turned on as well. So there is kind of an optimistic time, a ray of hope. I mean, I wouldn't get carried away with COVID is over. In fact, this opposition that I've been talking about between Eris and Haumea does see Haumea is in retrograde motion, moving backward toward that midpoint, and then also, Eris on the other hand is still moving forward. So this is getting closer and closer to an opposition. In the summertime, it'll be pretty strong. So I do think that the transformation of society indicated by this COVID situation, we're still in the soup. And I think that'll be true in the summer, even though we're hoping to get quite a few people vaccinated by then. I know the competing factor, though, is in terms of the news, is they say that there are these new strains, new variants of the virus that are more transmissible, much more easy to catch it. So there may be another wave. I hope not. Looks like we're on the good slope, the downhill of this situation. But I do see this coming up in the summer of a stronger opposition between Eris and Haumea, and and of course, Pluto, remember, also retrogrades and moves back towards that same. So they're all kind of still in alignment over the summer, and I think we're going to have a more difficult summer than we might. It'll take time before everybody's vaccinated, right? That's, we still have to have our safety measures until then, and that's something we all need to keep on top of and keep in touch with. So I hope that was helpful and informative, and like I say, it's an optimistic time right now, and I do believe that's sort of a feeling of light at the end of the tunnel that we're finally getting here. But it won't be the same as it was before, right? We all know that too. I mean, we still have to be careful. There are more pandemics possible on the horizon. This is not the only one we'll ever have in our lifetimes, probably. So it's still a difficult time and a time of adjustment, and a time when we're being asked to be more thoughtful. We're being asked to be more mindful, and to really explore what we have deep inside ourselves, which is the basic spiritual connection to the universe. And it's love. Love holds everything together. And as long as we can keep that in mind, we'll be okay. So thanks for listening. See you next time. Take care.